For joining me today to talk about your role as a mandated reporter. During this training, I will help you learn not only how to fulfill your legal obligation, but to advocate on the behalf of children to prevent further abuse. My name is Jamie Jones, and I am the Learning and Development Project Coordinator for Positive Childhood Alliance Georgia. Previously, I served as a K through 12 educator, which afforded me several opportunities to work in the mandated reporting space. Before we get started today, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. This training will last approximately 90 minutes, including questions. Make sure you have the handout which you can use as reference during or after the training. Now, some of the information we cover today may be difficult to hear, especially if you have any personal connection to abuse. We ask that you are aware of how your body is reacting to the information being shared and to prioritize self-care as needed. I am bringing this information to you today because you interact with families and children on a regular basis. By actively participating, your insights and experiences with families will make an invaluable contribution to all of us in this room. The goal of today's training is to discuss how your programs, organizations, communities, and you as an individual can protect children and support families, ensuring all mandated reporters and anyone involved with children or families understands your organization's reporting protocol, knows how to make a report of abuse, and recognizes the signs of child maltreatment can help prevent further abuse from occurring. While there is a legal obligation to report suspected abuse or neglect, we also have a moral responsibility to prevent it whenever possible by connecting families with resources and creating supportive environments. In 2024, reports of abuse and neglect were received for about 109,236 children in Georgia, of which 12,803 children had confirmed cases of abuse or neglect, and about 34,792 children received an alternative response, which usually involves some type of family supportive services. When people hear the words child abuse, they initially think of physical abuse. However, neglect accounts for the majority, about 63% of cases. It is also harder to prevent due to the complex social, cultural, and economical ties it has. Dive into the different types of abuse, we are going to review some family, community, and societal factors associated with abuse. Let's begin with the family and parental factors listed on the slide. Consider these first in terms of connecting families to support. When a report to the Department of Family and Children Services, or DFACS, is necessary, it is good to include these factors, as DFACS often asks about the caregiver's ability to nurture and protect their child. Can I have a volunteer pick out one of the bullet points listed on the slide and discuss why it might be a risk factor for abuse or neglect? Exactly. And for those examples we just discussed, what are some community resources or tools you could give to support families? Many people only consider the individual and family factors, as we reviewed on the last slide, when they think about child abuse. But most families come in contact with the child welfare system because of underlying societal issues. The majority of referrals made to DFACS are based on suspicion of neglect, and more often than not, general neglect cases are tied to poverty, including lack of childcare, housing, basic utilities, food, and medical and legal support. As you can see from Georgia-specific statistics listed on this slide, we have areas of opportunity where we could target efforts in which to improve the overall well-being of our families and prevent them from entering the child welfare system. Now, let's get into the impact of child abuse and neglect. research has shown a clear link between adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, including child abuse and neglect, and poorer health outcomes in youth and adulthood. Children exposed to more ACEs, such as abuse, neglect, family violence, and parental substance abuse, are at higher risk of chronic disease and mental health issues as adults. But when we tip the scales so that protective factors and positive childhood experiences outweigh early traumatic experiences, we can mitigate the impact of abuse or even prevent abuse from occurring. Research indicates that the absence of protective factors and positive childhood experiences may be more damaging to long term health outcomes than the presence of adverse childhood experiences. This is good news because we can't always prevent early adversity, but by focusing on positive experiences and protective factors, we can have an even bigger impact on healthy outcomes. We will now get into the different types of abuse and related indicators. In Georgia, mandated reporters are required to report the following to DFACS: child physical abuse by a caretaker, child neglect by a caretaker, child sexual abuse or exploitation, trafficking, which includes the commercial sexual exploitation of a child, and child labor trafficking, child emotional abuse by a caretaker, prenatal abuse, or imminent risk of serious harm to the child's physical, mental, or emotional health. Some examples of imminent risk of serious harm include when a person substantiated for sexually abusing a child resides in the home or is spending unsupervised time with a child, when a parent with an active foster care case gives birth to a new child, or driving under the influence with a child in the vehicle. DFACS's main concern is the primary caretaker's ability to nurture and protect their children. All reports require the alleged maltreater to be a caretaker responsible for the child, except for child sex or labor trafficking. In that case, it doesn't matter who is exploiting the child. It should be reported to DFACS. Reports made to DFACS that do not include allegations or suspicions of the criteria on this slide are likely to be screened out. The primary role of DFACS is child protection, to investigate and take protective measures when children are unsafe because of child abuse and neglect. Three of your training handout lists the physical and behavioral indicators of physical abuse. Physical abuse includes injuries like bruises, lacerations, fractures, burns, suffocation, poisoning, gunshot wounds, and other injuries to the internal organs or head. While physical indicators might be the clearest indicators of abuse, a child's behavior might also signal that something is wrong. Victims of physical abuse may display withdrawn or aggressive behavioral extremes, be self-destructive, complain of soreness or uncomfortable movement, wear clothing that is inappropriate for the weather, express discomfort with physical contact, or become chronic runaways. Physical abuse teaches children to be submissive, fearful, and/or aggressive. It also teaches them that hitting is a way to control others or solve problems. This is reflected in the child's ability to handle stressful situations and how they interact with other children and authority figures. While injuries can occur accidentally when a child is at play, physical abuse should be suspected if the explanations do not fit the injury or if a pattern of frequency is apparent. Always think, what is logical for the child's age and developmental stage? Clustered bruising may be a sign of repeated and abusive punishment, as well as marks that appear in a patterned shape. The location of a mark can also indicate abuse, as marks on the child's ears, soft part of the cheek, neck, inner thighs or genitals, buttocks, hands, and feet are less likely to be from accidental injuries during play or other movement. To burns, again, always consider the age of the child and if the injury makes sense. For example, is the child mobile and easily able to reach for hot beverages? Accidental burns caused by hot liquids typically look like splash marks. Inflicted burns can have more distinct shapes and borders, such as cigarette burns, matches, etc. Another type of inflicted burn is caused by dipping a child's body part into hot liquids, called immersion burns, and results in burns that look like gloves, socks, or burns on the buttocks. These types of burns are almost always not accidental and are considered abuse. Abusive head trauma, more commonly known as shaken baby syndrome, is another type of physical abuse occurring in infants birth to about 6 months old. Signs of head trauma, such as non-responsiveness, may not appear until 12 to 24 hours after the baby is moderately to harshly shaken. Perpetrators of abusive head trauma are often secondary caregivers who are frustrated or do not understand the cries of infants and shake the baby in order to get them to calm down. Typically, a medical professional will be the person to identify and report abusive head trauma to Child Protective Services. Those who don't cruise rarely bruise is in reference to the idea that immobile infants should not experience a great deal of bruising. Accidents involving immobile infants do occur, but when there is an inconsistent story or the bruises are in various stages of healing, there may be a problem. It is also important to understand the differences between corporal punishment and physical abuse. Corporal punishment is legal in the state of Georgia. Physical abuse is not. The line between corporal punishment and physical abuse is the injury. Lasting marks or injuries that result from punishment indicate abuse. Examples include a bruise, a burn, a missing patch of hair, or a welt. We have listed the only professionals permitted to take photos of a child's injuries without parental permission. Remember, you don't need evidence or photos to make a report. Now we will cover prenatal abuse, which is an infant's exposure to chronic or severe alcohol or illegal substances during pregnancy. A mandated report is only required if the infant tests positive for substances at birth or shows physical or developmental signs of maternal substance abuse at or following birth. Medical professionals working or volunteering in a setting where infants are born or are immediately cared for are the only mandated reporters legally required to report prenatal abuse. You can see the state's technical definition of neglect on the slide. Essentially, it includes a caregiver's failure to care or provide for a child regarding their physical and mental or emotional health, supervision, education, or medical needs. Abandonment also falls under neglect. It's when a parent is absent physically or in their parental duties for an extended time or any length that creates a substantial risk of harm to the child. Physical neglect includes the inability or refusal of the primary caregivers to provide basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter. It also includes living arrangements that threaten a child's health, such as exposure to danger, toxic or lethal items, unsafe structures, or exposure to bitter weather. Supervisory neglect consists of the child being left alone, left with an inadequate caregiver, or when a caregiver is at home but is not watching the child closely enough. Children whose parents use drugs or have untreated mental illnesses are more likely to be left alone or inadequately supervised. Often, older siblings are left caring for younger siblings and can be considered inadequate supervision depending on their ages. Inadequate supervision can also be failing to protect a child from a third party, toxic chemicals, firearms that aren't properly stored, choking hazards, or supervision needed to prevent drowning around bodies of water. Educational neglect occurs when a caregiver does not provide education as required by law for their child. Schools should have policies in place to determine when to report based on children missing school. Medical neglect should be reported when a caregiver does not attend to a child's injuries, health needs, or chronic illnesses. For example, medical neglect could include a child that may have rotting teeth, untreated fractures or injuries, or untreated and severe asthma. Regarding religious beliefs, if a child is being medically treated solely by spiritual means, according to the practices of a recognized church or religious denomination, then it should not be considered child abuse according to Georgia law. However, as a mandated reporter, you are allowed to report anything you consider to put the child in an unsafe or dangerous situation. Continuum, and often reporters hesitate or are unsure whether to report in neglectful situations. Where's the line that crosses over in a reportable situation? Always consider the age of the child, their ability to self protect, and the caregiver's capacity. Children ages 0 to 6 years are more vulnerable. Parents who are addicted to substances or have inadequate parenting skills are responsible for many of the neglect cases. The stress caused by poverty increases the risk of parenting difficulties and can affect a parent's ability to meet the needs of their children. Living in poverty or having limited resources is not neglect. For situations where a caregiver seeks basic necessities but does not have the means to purchase them, a link to community resources should be considered versus a report of neglect to DFACS. We do not want to discourage people from reporting suspected child abuse and neglect. If you suspect child abuse or neglect, it is your duty to report it. However, not every concern about a family or child is best served by a DFACS investigation. When the risk of imminent danger to a child is low, how can you act as a supportive resource to the family? Nearly half of families who have their children removed from the home have trouble paying for basic necessities. That's not hard to believe considering 40% of children in Georgia live in a low income household, which is about $60,000 annually for a family of four, and 18.8% live in a household at or below the federal poverty level, about $30,000 annually for a family of four. Some communities are disproportionately reported to the DFACS hotline as a result of poverty and inequitable access to supports. For example, Black families are more likely than white families to be reported to DFACS. This difference can be explained by historical under-resourcing of Black communities, higher rates of poverty that stem from policies that prevent wealth accumulation, such as redlining and mandated reporter bias. It is important to examine our biases when making a report and further our collective understanding to equip families with resources. You can see the list of physical and behavioral indicators of neglect on the slide. In many situations, families may need more assistance or resources. Organizations should try to connect families with assistance when possible as a preventative measure. But know that DFACS also connects families to concrete supports to create a better living situation so that the child can stay in the home. Emotional abuse is considered any act of a caregiver that causes observable impairment in a child's ability to function within a normal range of actions and behavior, or that create a risk of impairment. Examples of emotional abuse are verbal threats or bizarre punishment designed to isolate or humiliate by a caretaker. Exposure to domestic violence that results in emotional distress to the child is also considered emotional abuse. Exposure can range from witnessing, hearing, or perceiving the aftermath of domestic violence. While emotional abuse is not physical, it does have developmental consequences. A child that has experienced emotional abuse may struggle with speech disorders, lag in physical development, exhibit disruptive behavior, and more.
Sexual abuse can be difficult to talk about, but in order to prevent it, we must be open to discussing and understanding it. Researchers estimate that 1 in 10 children will experience sexual abuse before they turn 18, and up to 70% of all child sexual abuse is perpetrated by another, usually older child. Child sexual abuse is the exploitation of a child for the sexual gratification of an older adult or older child, and includes fondling, rape, commercial sexual exploitation of a child, also known as sex trafficking, indecent exposure and exhibitionism, or using the internet as a vehicle for exploitation. Keep in mind that direct physical contact with a child is not required to sexually abuse a child. Indecent exposure, showing pornography to a child, or exploiting a child on the internet are all examples of sexual abuse. Depending on your interaction with the child, you may see physical indicators, but many of us will only see the behavioral indicators of sexual abuse. Some things we see children do, act out, or play with others can alarm us. But by understanding healthy sexual development, we can accurately differentiate between normal sexual behavior and abnormal sexual behavior. These indicators can also be seen in your training handout. Considering that a lot of child sexual abuse is perpetrated by an older youth, so we have some situations that might even involve consensual acts between minors, and so I want to clarify what you are obligated to report as a mandated reporter to DFACS. That is any sexual act involving a minor 13 years or younger, and any even consensual sexual act that includes a minor if there's more than a 4-year age difference between the pair. So that means if there are a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old together, that would be considered child abuse and is reportable to DFACS. Now, a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old together, that would not be reportable to DFACS. So yes, this does conflict with the age of consent in our state, which is 16 years old. Keep in mind that these are policies revolving around making a report to DFACS. You may choose to call law enforcement and file a criminal report instead if the child is under 16 years of age and if there's less than a 4-year age difference. So an example is a 14-year-old girl who is having sex with a 16-year-old boy and they are kind of consenting to it. This would not be reportable to DFACS unless you suspect it is coerced or the parent is failing to protect the child. However, it can be reported to law enforcement. You're not obligated to do this within your role as a mandated reporter, though. If it is suspected that a child has been the victim of sexual abuse, it should be reported to DFACS. If that case is confirmed, the child will be referred to a Child Advocacy Center, also known as a CAC. There, they will participate in a recorded forensic interview by professionals to minimize the trauma. They're also eligible for free counseling by professionals who specialize in child sexual abuse. We encourage you to learn more about preventing child sexual abuse. We recommend contacting the Georgia Center for Child Advocacy. They have many prevention trainings. The commercial sexual exploitation of child, also known as CSEC, refers to a range of crimes and activities involving the sexual abuse or exploitation of a child for financial benefit or in exchange of anything of value. This can include monetary things and non-monetary things. So non-monetary things could include like food, shelter, drugs, or even protection from a person. Child labor means forcing a child to perform a service of economic or financial value. You can see the physical and behavioral indicators of CSEC listed on the slide and in your training handout. I want to point out that youth experiencing homelessness and living in shelters are especially at risk. One study estimates that 30% of shelter youth and 70% of street youth are victims of CSEC. Many of these youth will engage in sexual exploitations as a means of survival. Additionally, a history of physical and sexual abuse is common among CSEC victims. One study estimates that more than 90% of children who are commercially sexually exploited have been sexually abused in the past. Child labor trafficking victims have similar vulnerabilities. They're more likely to have experienced abuse or neglect, are homeless or have run away, and are from unstable and disadvantaged areas. Now that we have reviewed the different types of abuse and neglect, we want to go over how to recognize and best respond to children who are trying to disclose abuse. Often, children will not directly disclose. They will kind of test the water to gauge our reactions as adults by disclosing indirectly, through a disguised disclosure, or asking the adult to keep it a secret. It is important to take all disclosures seriously, as studies have shown that children rarely lie about being abused. What may be some reasons that a child would choose not to disclose abuse? Because of the fear and shame that children might associate with abuse, adults must listen calmly and try not to show any emotional reactions in their body language. Write down any detail that the child gives you and reassure the child by saying things like, "I believe you," or "I'm so glad that you told me you did the right thing." Don't say things that may challenge the child's disclosure, such as, "Why didn't you stop them? Why haven't you told anyone before now?" Or, "Are you sure that's what happened?" You can use the disclosure section starting on page 5 of your training handout. It provides concrete examples of what to do and what not to do when a child is disclosing. If a child discloses abuse, believe them. As I said previously, children rarely lie about being abused and may exhibit a variety of behaviors as an outcry for help. When talking with a child that is potentially disclosing abuse, minimize the number of questions that you ask and don't use leading questions such as, "Did they touch you there?" We want to try to use only open-ended questions such as, "Tell me more," or "What happened next?" You don't need to get all the details. As soon as you suspect child abuse or neglect is occurring, follow your organization's reporting protocol to make the report. Leave the investigative work up to the professionals. It's their job to investigate the situation, and if needed, professionally interview the child and others. Here is a disclosure scenario for us to practice. Chelsea is a 7-year-old girl on your soccer team. One afternoon, Chelsea's mom is late picking her up and sends the sitter to pick her up. When Chelsea finds out, she begins to sulk and express that she hates going with the sitter because she always bothers me and I don't like it. She pleads with you and the other coach to let her stay until her mom gets off work. She becomes increasingly agitated as the time approaches. What type of disclosure do you think this is? And how would you handle it? Yeah, this could be an indirect disclosure. Some things that we want to do to address it is to find a place to talk to Chelsea about this to get a little bit more information. We want to try to make her comfortable, get on eye level with Chelsea, and just really calmly ask, "Chelsea, you seem really upset with your sitter or that your sitter's coming. Is there something that you want to tell us about?" Or you can even ask, "I hear that the sitter bothers you. Can you tell me more what you mean by bothers?" Listen openly and calmly. Try to keep your emotions and nonverbal cues to a minimum. If possible and appropriate, write down the facts and words the child has stated them, probably after that fact. We really want to avoid leading questions such as, "Is your sitter hurting you?" or "Are there things that have happened?" As soon as you suspect child abuse or neglect is occurring, make that report to DFACS, and there might be other protocol measures in the scenario as well. It might just be that she thought Chelsea's mom was picking her up and she was really excited for them to be together more than it was about the sitter. So again, using those open-ended questions to learn more. Now we're going to learn all about your role as a mandated reporter and what are your rights and obligations. Georgia law requires certain individuals to report suspected abuse within their role as a professional. This includes most people who come into direct or indirect contact with children, either professionally or through volunteering. There's only one exception to making a report among the mandated reporters, and that is for clergy. Information learned within the context of a confession is still confidential and does not fall under the mandated reporter law. It's time for a pop quiz. You're a mandated reporter as part of your professional role, but what happens when you go home or are off duty? Let's say that you're a teacher on summer vacation. You are relaxing at a community pool when you see a situation occur between a parent and a child that you would consider to be abusive. Are you required by Georgia law to report it to DFACS? The answer is no. But since you're not acting in any professional role, you're not legally required to report this to DFACS. But anyone is allowed and encouraged to report suspected child abuse, whether they're a mandated reporter or not. Now let's say that your church Bible school you're volunteering at for the summer, and you suspect one of your young students is being abused. Are you legally required to report it to DFACS? Yes, you are required by Georgia law to report it to DFACS. This is because you're considered a volunteer of a child serving organization or as a church, so you would be legally required to report it. Ideally, mandated reporting is the early recognition of child abuse and neglect. Some signs of child abuse might be very visible, but other behaviors or indicators of abuse may leave a mandated reporter questioning whether to make a report. What are some barriers to reporting suspected child abuse and neglect that you have experienced or that you think mandated reporters are likely to experience? Some barriers to reporting include limited knowledge of the signs and symptoms, fear of inaccuracy, or even fear of hurting that professional-parent relationship. Reporting suspected abuse not only helps protect children from further harm, but often families are provided referrals to assistance. Some mandated reporters also falsely think that if things were really bad, someone else might have or has already done something about it. Don't assume someone else is handling the situation. That is called the bystander effect. Although there are barriers, we want mandated reporters to think, I am requesting a service to ensure the safety of a child. There may also be times when the appropriate action is connecting families to supportive resources and not making a report of abuse or neglect. And then there are also times where it's appropriate to do both. As a mandated reporter, you're legally required to report any suspected child abuse or neglect to DFACS. It is not your job or role to investigate or collect proof. It's DFACS's job to investigate and to determine if abuse is occurring and to decide the best course of action. So legally, what are you required to do to fulfill your role as a mandated reporter? You must report all suspected abuse or neglect immediately, but at least within 24 hours. This includes any new incident of abuse that you suspect, even if there's already a case open. So as an example, if you have made a report on child abuse and neglect last week on a child, and this week you see that there are new bruises you suspect are from abuse, you need to make another report to DFACS. If you are not the owner or distributor, but are in the possession of unlawful images or materials of children, such as digital or print materials displaying child sexual abuse, you must turn those materials into law enforcement within 72 hours to assist in an investigation. Some organizations designate a certain person or persons who are responsible for making all child abuse reports on behalf of the staff. It could also be a committee to reduce bias. This person is referred to as the designated reporter. A lot of hospital staffs and other big organizations have a designated reporter. So all of their staff report their suspicions to the hospital social worker, who then files a report to DFACS. If an organization has a designated mandated reporter, that person must submit all reports made to them, regardless of whether they agree with them or not. An employee or volunteer who makes a report to their organization's designated reporter will have fulfilled their legal obligation. In organizations without a designated reporter, it's up to each individual to make a report of suspected abuse. If a mandated reporter fails to report, they can be charged with a misdemeanor, which is up to 5 years in prison. In addition to legal requirements, you also have rights. As a mandated reporter, you're allowed to report anonymously by calling the hotline. However, if you make a report online, it will require at least an email. Whether you report anonymously or not, DFACS does not disclose who made the report to the family. Although many times families can guess who made the report if the child only goes certain places. You also have what's called limited liability. This means that whenever you are making a report of abuse based on suspicion, it's assumed that you're doing so in good faith, that people can't take legal action against you or in retaliation to you for that report. That includes the alleged perpetrator and also your organization. You're permitted to know the outcome of a report, but only if it's substantiated or not. And as a mandated reporter, we also have some recommendations for you. We hope that you familiarize yourself with your organization's reporting policy. If you don't have one, we have some links to examples in our training handout. We hope that you seek additional information or training on preventing or responding to child abuse and neglect if needed, such as child sexual abuse. And we also hope that you promote child safety policies in your workplace or community. There's many things that we can do to help support families and to protect children. There are multiple ways to report. The first is by calling the DFACS hotline, 1-855-GA-CHILD, which is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When making a report, be prepared to include the following information when possible: the names and addresses of the child and the child's parents or caretakers, the age of the child or other children in the home, the nature and extent of the child's injuries, including any evidence of previous injuries, information that the reporting person believes might be helpful in establishing the cause of the injury and identifying the perpetrator. And it's good to include the child's current location and other children in the home. Again, the number is 1-855-GA-CHILD, and the number is on the first page of your training handout and also up on the screen. To report electronically, go to cps.dhs.ga.gov to fill out the electronic reporting form. You must first register and enter a specific code that shows you have taken a mandated reporter training. You will receive the code at the end of this training after you complete the evaluation and receive the training certificate to your email. In certain situations, it may be necessary to call law enforcement in addition to calling DFACS. Law enforcement is designed to respond within minutes, whereas DFACS can respond pretty quickly or up to 5 days depending on the current situation. DFACS refers to this as present danger. It is an immediate, significant, and clearly observable family condition, child condition, individual behavior or action, or family circumstance, which is in the process of occurring and which obviously endangers or threatens a child. It requires immediate action. When a child is in present danger, the fact of the danger itself is sufficient for you to act. You do not need to know more. When a child's in present danger, intervention must be immediate, that very day, or even as soon as you encounter it. DFACS will send a confirmation to anyone who has made a report that details how the person can learn about the outcome of a case. School personnel should receive confirmation of the report in addition to the outcome of the case within 5 days of the completion of the investigation, if it is confirmed or not any other details. Whether you report anonymously or not, your identity will not be given to the family. Additionally, there is potential that you will need to appear in court. If the DFACS caseworker assigns a case to Family Supportive Services, then a family has access to a number of services. Just as in an open case with DFACS, the family can receive services like counseling, community support, economic assistance and referrals, evaluations, and more. If a case is assigned to family support, but then the caseworker notices a safety threat, the case will automatically be reassigned to investigation again so that the family can create a safety plan and will now follow that track. There's no difference as to what supports are available. The difference is the family's willingness to participate in those supports during the family support cases. Child well-being is not the responsibility of any one entity. It is a shared responsibility. It may be helpful for us to clarify the role of the Georgia Division of Family and Children Services, also known as DFACS. DFACS has a very defined process based on Georgia law for screening reports and determining if an investigation is required. About half of calls made to DFACS hotline don't meet the criteria for an investigation. It's likely that most of these calls represents concerns about a children or family that need to be addressed by other means outside of DFACS. The primary role of DFACS is child protection. So to investigate when children are unsafe because of child abuse and neglect, and to take protective measures when children are likely to be harmed by abuse or neglect in the foreseeable future. DFACS is not responsible for investigating risks to child well-being other than abuse and neglect. It is the community, including educators, neighbors, medical professionals, service providers, and others that interact with children and families who are responsible for supporting child and family well-being and resourcing families as well. DFACS can refer families to resources after investigating them, but because of the investigatory role of DFACS, many families don't voluntarily take advantage of these resources. Therefore, DFACS is often not the best messenger to connect families to supports. Because of your role in the community, you are often the best messenger to connect families to support and to prevent the need for DFACS intervention. Find Help Georgia is another option when there's not a concern for abuse or neglect, but simply a need for resource linkage. Find Help Georgia is a free, centralized resource hub that will give caregivers information they can use wherever they live in the state and even nationwide. In essence, it is a free online directory that lists free and reduced cost programs that provide direct support to people seeking assistance. Help seekers can search online at findhelpga.org or get in touch with a resource specialist by phone. If your organization provides direct services, we encourage you to make your program listed in there and that you have it claimed as well so that you can keep it up to date and readily available. PCA Georgia provides regular trainings to organizations looking to use Find Help Georgia as a resource tool. Go to findhelpga.org to learn more.
So we have reviewed the different types of abuse-related indicators, how to make a report, your rights as a mandated reporter, and also your role as a mandated supporter to help connect families to concrete supports. We're going to go over some final tips before we head into some activities. So we want to make sure that everyone in your organization knows who is responsible for making a report, if it is someone else in your organization or if it is you directly. We also want to make sure that everyone, even volunteers, is provided some form of training on their role as a mandated reporter and to respond and recognize abuse. And if you're unsure about what's going on, it's okay to discuss it with the supervisor. These things might be unclear, or someone who has more knowledge or has worked in the field more might have a better understanding of when to report or when to help families and connect them with resources. Now that you've done one of the two activities, either reviewing the notes or the strength-based activity, maybe you've done both if you have time, now it's time to go on to practice scenarios, and you are required to do these, and hopefully time permits at least 2. At this point, we're going to remind participants that we need to be considering the child's age because they're especially vulnerable, and we also want to consider if the concern is best addressed through a supportive resource or a call to DFACS because we suspect child abuse or neglect.